With all that we know about the prophet Joseph Smith, what do you know about his mother and three sisters? The story of the restoration can't be told without mentioning them, and today we get to learn about who they were, what their lives were like, and the impact they had on the life of Joseph Smith. Welcome to the second episode of Unnamed Women of the Doctrine and Covenants. This is a special bonus series from the Sunday on Monday podcast. Now, if you're wondering, what's Sunday on Monday? It is a Deseret Bookshelf Plus podcast brought to you by LDS Living, where we take the Come Follow Me lesson for the week and we really dig into the scriptures together. If you want to know more about us and that specific podcast, click on the link in the description or go to ldsliving.com/Sunday on Monday for a free 30-day trial of Deseret Bookshelf Plus, which is like Audible, and you get to read all of the church books. It's so cool. Now, my favorite thing about the Sunday on Monday podcast is each week I get to invite two friends to join me and discuss the scriptures and do real-life application with them. For this bonus series, I am thrilled to introduce you to my co-host, who is Dr. Jenny Reeder, and together we've invited our friend Cherie Clark to join us. Now, quick reminder, Jenny Reeder has a PhD in American history from George Mason University, specializing in women's history, and she currently works for the Church History Department. Cherie is a researcher and was Jenny's research assistant when she wrote the book, First, The Life and Faith of Emma Smith, which I highly recommend. Such a good book. So these two know their stuff, and I'm so excited they're here to teach us. Yay! Now, before Jenny and Cherie even talk, I'm just going to start out by saying this. When they sent me their quote-unquote notes on these women, it's a book. I mean, holy cow. We are praying that God stretches time today because there is so much to say about these incredible women. And while they're not unnamed, they're not necessarily, well, they're not really named. I mean, they're kind of unnamed, but whatever. We're just going to do whatever we want to do on this one because we have to talk about Joseph's mother and his sisters. We just do. And who better to talk about them than you two, because you've paid the price to know a lot about these women. So I'm just going to turn the time over to you, Jenny.
Yes.
Talk to us about Lucy Mack Smith and why you thought it was important to talk about these women.
Well, just like I don't think Joseph could have become a prophet without his wife, Emma, I'm pretty sure he couldn't have without his mother, Lucy Mack Smith, and his three sisters, Sophronia.
Amen.
And I don't know much about these sisters, but I sure have found everything I could, and they are incredible.
Amazing, amazing women. Yeah.
I interrupted
absolutely.
you, Jenny. What were the sisters' names? Sophronia?
Sophronia, Katharine, and Lucy.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we get to talk about four women today.
Mm-hmm.
So should we just dive into Lucy? Mama
Yeah.
Lucy, here we go.
Yeah, let's dive in. You want to start, Cherie?
Her father was Solomon Mack
Mm-hmm.
Sr., and he had a pretty classic conversion story.
Yes, I love this because you see it in all of the generations.
Mm-hmm.
He had fervent prayers. He saw a bright light appeared, and he heard a voice calling to him. And passages of scripture came to his mind, and they were personal messages. And he was a very religious man, which, of course, really influenced Lucy Mack Smith because she was incredibly religious also. Her mother was considered very pious and was part of the First Congregational Church of East Hadman. Where was that, Jenny?
That is in
New Hampshire?
I believe so. Yes. We know Lucy Mack Smith was born on July 8th, 1775 in Gilsum, New Hampshire.
There we go.
And I heard someone say that she was born in the age of revolution. July 8th, 1775.
That's awesome.
That's
Right?
so true.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. It's in her blood.
She had four siblings who were considered pretty successful in worldly terms. There was Stephen, Solomon, Daniel, and Lydia. So there was 5 children altogether.
Actually, there's more because she had a
Oh,
older
Lavinia
brother.
and Levisa.
I think that's how you say it. I think it's Lavina and Levisa. That's my guess.
Okay. Who they both died. And she nursed them during their final illnesses and just really affected her, the death of her sister, Lavina, and caused just really deep sorrow.
They were very dear to her. And I love that years later, years later, when she has her own daughter, Lucy, and when Joseph receives revelation about baptisms for the dead, Lucy is baptized for her Aunt Lavina.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, isn't that sweet?
Yes.
They were very present. I mean, she taught her children about her sisters and her family. So they were present, even though they had passed away.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
so it tells you just how important they were to her because she did do that. I mean, that was the thing about Lucy Mack Smith. She was such a missionary and really wanted her family members to join the church, and she would send beautiful letters to them with her testimony to try and convince them of the gospel and of Jesus Christ and get them to join with her. And I know for sure that two of them did.
The letters that she has written are incredible.
Where can we read those?
So there are bits and pieces in Witness of Women,
Okay.
which is a book that Janice Johnson and I put together to help make access to women's words more easy to find and easy to use.
And can they find that at Deseret Book, Witness of Women?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. And in there, it's a letter to her sister-in-law, Temperance.
There's also Janice Johnson wrote her thesis on Mormon female religiosity in 1831 to 1843. And so she has several letters that have this information too.
Witness of Women is awesome. I would highly recommend anyone that wants to know more about women of the Restoration. There's just little tidbits and stories that were awesome. So,
and they're arranged topically to make it a little bit easier to use,
especially if you're teaching. It's a great resource for teaching.
Well, let's go back to first. I'm just struck on this idea that her father was a visionary man. It's really pretty awesome to think that her dad would be visionary so that when her son comes to her, she wasn't like, what? You're nuts. Like, her parentage prepared her for her progeny.
Right.
Ooh, go ahead and quote me on that. Did that even make sense?
Yeah.
Her parentage prepared her for her progeny? Who am I?
The thing is, too, is that Lucy was very visionary. So it was a genetic thing. It went through their family. So,
but also her husband, when she married Joseph Smith, Senior, we call him now, and he also had visions and dreams.
Oh my gosh.
So it's this really beautiful thing that happens to them and prepares them for their progeny, as Tammy would say.
I don't even know if I have to look that word up later. I probably.
It's right. It's good.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny. Okay, so now Lucy's grown up. I mean, how sweet and tender that she nursed her 6 sisters who passed away. She grows up and she marries Joseph Smith Sr. and begins a family with him. So tell me a little bit about that family and what was she like as a mom?
She had a lot of kids.
Yes, she did.
She was a prolific mother.
How many children did she have? How many did she birth?
She gave birth to 11 children. 2 of them died in infancy. One of them was stillborn, and then another one died the same year he was born. And the rest of them lived to adulthood. Of course, she lost a lot of them as well before she died.
I just can't imagine that's like my greatest fear is to outlive any of my children. I really pray for that at night. Like, please don't let me outlive my kids. I don't want to bury any children.
Right.
And women that I know who have, my heart, I love you all, like, goes out to any woman that's had to bury a child. And she buried many. Oh, breaks my heart. So
many at that time buried many.
Yeah.
Which, of course, is why the gospel was so important to them, because, you know, they felt like their children were going to go to hell and that they were lost. And then Joseph bringing this religion with the truth about children being saved in heaven no matter what. So it's a beautiful doctrine.
And when you consider Joseph's life and the family members he would lose and siblings, it just gives so much more power and emphasis to those revelations he received.
So, and the thing that kills me too, we were talking about this yesterday, is her youngest daughter was Lucy. She had her when she was 46.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Joseph Smith Sr. was 50 and she was 46.
Yeah.
So she would have grown up with a brother as a prophet.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And we'll tell you all about that because it is
Yeah.
the cutest, funnest thing when you learn a little bit about her
Yeah.
personality.
Okay, so we'll get to her when we get done with this. All
Yeah.
right, carry on, kids.
The one thing I think too about Lucy Mack Smith is the reason all nine of her children survived is that she really would pray when they were sick or anything happened to them. She prayed with such fervent faith to have them healed. And there's several stories that her children were healed because of
Uh-huh.
that.
Wow.
But she also was healed when her oldest living child was Alvin, who was born in 1798. When he was 2 years old and she had baby Hiram, who was born in 1800, she got very sick with a very heavy cold. They called it a hectic fever or confirmed consumption. And she just grew weaker and weaker. And her mom came to help take care of the babies. And she spent a sleepless night pleading with God to spare her life, that I might bring up my children and comfort the heart of my husband. And she made a covenant with God that she would endeavor to get that religion that would enable me to serve him right, whether it was in the Bible or wherever it might be found, even if it was to be attained from heaven by prayer and faith. And then she, just like her father, heard a voice that quoted scripture: seek and you shall find, knock and it shall be opened unto you. Let your heart be comforted. Ye believe in God, believe also in me. Boom.
Boom.
Well, and that covenant she made, I mean, she kept that covenant her entire life. That's the thing. This woman was fearless and faithful like nobody else. So I love that about her.
So for the first 20 years of her marriage, she was not affiliated with any specific church, but she read the Bible and she would read the Bible to her children, and she taught them to read from the Bible. They were a Bible family, a family of the Word. Joseph Smith Sr. had helped to develop the Universalist Society, which is the church that believes everyone's going to have salvation. But Lucy did not agree, and she felt very responsible in helping her children attain salvation. And her daughters did too when they were mothers. It's really interesting.
Yeah, Lucy really believed that they needed baptism, where Joseph Smith Sr. did not believe in that. So,
right. But they made that marriage work, man. They worked together.
They were committed.
They were.
Yeah. Religion was a big deal to both of them because they were such a visionary couple. Both of them had dreams and lots of religious ideas. And then they had their Sophronia in 1803, and Joseph was born in 1805, and then Samuel Harrison is born in 1808, and then Ephraim is born and died in 1810.
All right, so go in now and tell me, what was she like as a mom? How did she raise her kids? Give me some of those good stories.
Do you want to tell them, Jenny, about the typhus epidemic?
Sure.
Oh, we have to do that story.
Yeah. So in the winter of 1812 to 1813, there was a typhus epidemic. And at the time, they were living in Royalton, Vermont.
Okay.
And it struck their whole family for about a year. So Sophronia was 9 years old, and she was bedfast for almost 3 months and almost died. And Cherie, you want to tell them about how Lucy and Joseph Sr. knelt down and prayed for her?
Yeah, they knelt at her bedside and poured out their hearts in prayer for her recovery. And they both had a testimony and faith that if they did that, she would recover. Meanwhile, Sophronia apparently stops breathing, and Lucy Mack Smith wraps her in a blanket and paces the floor with her faith. And all of a sudden, Sophronia lets out this gasp and starts sobbing and begins breathing again. Wow. And that was because of the faith of Lucy and Joseph Sr. And
her parents.
They just really were very faithful parents, and that is the way they lived. They kept God. God was a partner in their marriage and with their family.
Always.
Wow.
And all the kids at that time were sick, except Joseph Sr. and Lucy Mack were not sick, but Lucy was pregnant with Katharine. So
Okay.
I mean, can you imagine that living in a little cabin somewhere, all your kids are sick for like a year? Whew.
No, no, I can't.
And so sick, like on the verge of death sick.
Literally, yes.
Yeah.
Wow. How did it affect Joseph?
So Joseph was recovering from the typhus epidemic when he had complications that set in, and he got a huge fever sore on his chest and then agonizing pain and swelling in his leg. And I can't even imagine. So Lucy, like she had done for Sophronia, she carries him around in her arms for about 2 weeks to manage his suffering. But then she became ill, and Hiram, his older brother, held Joseph. And so a doctor came, and we probably all heard the story about how he was trying to relieve the pain by making an incision along his shin between the knee and the ankle. And as soon as it healed, the pain would come back and it would swell again. And he wanted to amputate the leg. But what happened, Sheree?
Lucy stood up to the doctor and said she would not allow Joseph's leg to be amputated, and started looking around and trying to find another doctor that would help them. And as we know, there was another doctor that tried something that was brand new and ended up saving Joseph's leg. But the other thing I wanted to say is during that time when Lucy's pregnant with Katharine, she's walking around carrying. Joseph is 7 years old, and she's
I was going to ask
carrying him
that.
around.
Wow.
And, and then before that, she had been carrying around Sophronia, who's even older.
Mm-hmm. She was
What
9.
was she, 9? So can you imagine? But again, that was Lucy. She was very much a hands-on mother who just furiously loved her children and really was faithful about it too. So
The way you've just described her during those illnesses just really plays into the type of mother that she was, that she just fiercely loved her children. So that when Joseph comes to her 7 years later at age 14, 15, and says he has a vision, it's amazing how she embraces that concept and that idea. So talk to me a little bit about what it was like for her to be the mother of a prophet and this young boy that has this vision.
I think it's really interesting because not only is she a very naturally religious person, Sheree, do you have that quote from William Smith?
Oh, yeah.
This is Joseph's younger brother.
He said about his mother, "My mother, who was a very pious woman and much interested in the welfare of her children, both here and hereafter, made use of every means which her parental love could suggest to get us engaged in seeking for our soul's salvation or getting religion."
Wow.
I love that. It meant so much for her. But she also is struggling because her husband, Joseph Sr., is not able to provide for the family. They often have to move in search of a better job or a better farm or whatever, but she always worked. So one of her talents, and I love this because I love material culture, she painted and sold oilcloth covers that could be used like as a tablecloth or as kind of a rug on the floor. And if you go to the Smith home, the frame house in Manchester, New York, you can see some of her, well, it was recreated to look at like work that she had done. But you also see that in the Emma and Joseph Smith home in Harmony and in the Emma and Joseph home in Kirtland.
Oh, wow.
So she just tried to make things beautiful and refined wherever she went.
And Tammy, you've been talking about what kind of a mother she was, how she worked and what she did. And think about this now, if you had 9 children and Lucy cooked in kettles over an open fire, chopped the wood, hauled water to the house, kept a garden, wove and sewed, made candles and soap. She baked bread daily for her family.
It's a lot of kids.
Painted these oilcloth covers. She and her daughters would bake gingerbread and other snacks and treats to try and sell and to make money. She did everything she could to make sure that they had the temporal needs met. why Joseph Smith Sr. was struggling so much just to have that farm work out. And we know, the weather wasn't cooperating a lot of times and different things happening. So, but she
Holy
was
cow.
amazing.
Amazing.
So another thing that I love is that she was the first witness, the first person that Joseph told about his vision in the sacred grove in 1820. He came in and leaned against the fireplace. She asked him what happened, and he said, "Never mind, all is well. I am well enough off. I have learned for myself that Presbyterianism is not true."
I like how you call her the first witness of the first vision. That's really cool.
She was right there through it all.
Yeah, why not her? The mother. That's really cool.
So in 1823, Joseph had met Moroni and learned about the plates. And that was in September. And a couple months later, Alvin got really sick. He had started building a frame house for his family. And he was really the caretaker of the family when his father couldn't take care of the family.
I think maybe Joseph Smith Sr. had, I don't know, maybe a breakdown or something. It was like he just couldn't do it anymore. And Alvin really
stepped up. He stepped up.
He did.
After he died, his father it was really hard for his father. And Joseph had to go work for his neighbor's father, Josiah Stoll, in South Bainbridge, New York, and in Harmony, Pennsylvania.
I think one of the things that, as I read more and studied about Lucy's life, and especially those early years with all of the children and how hard they worked, and then Joseph gets the gospel and the first vision and everything, and you look at, as we go on, we'll go through everybody, and they really struggled with temporal things in their life. And it just is such a testimony to me that we cannot expect temporal blessings to always follow us when we're being righteous, because they're so righteous, right?
Yeah. It's a really great point, Cherie, because I think sometimes we often equate righteousness with temporal goods.
Yeah.
And that God's going to take care of us, or this is it. This is what I've been waiting for. And
yeah, we don't believe in a prosperity gospel.
We don't.
Because bad things still happen.
Yeah. This is a great example of that. And they persevered. They continued to believe and search and follow. And I think that is astounding. And because of Lucy Mack Smith's example, who was willing to set for her children. So she was an anchor for this family.
And they had mobs attacking their house and trying to get in and trying to get the plates or find Joseph or find Hiram, find whoever they could. And so they had to do a lot to protect their family and the plates. And one time she says this, and I love this: "My soul swelled with joy that scarcely heightened. Am I indeed the mother of a prophet of the God of heaven, the honored instrument in performing so much great work? I felt that I was in the purview of angels, and my heart bounded at the thought of the great condescension of the Almighty. Thus I spent the night surrounded by enemies, and yet in an ecstasy of happiness. And truly I can say that my soul did magnify, and my spirit rejoiced in God, my Savior."
I think that's awesome.
Tammy, you know what that reminds me of?
Tell me.
It reminds me of Mary, mother of Jesus, of her Magnificat, her prayer.
Yes, it's exactly it. Oh, they have that in common. Beautiful. Okay, before we get into the story about the sisters, though, here's what I want you guys to do. Pick a favorite story about Lucy and then share it. I have one. We all came with one that we love. So share your favorite Lucy Mack Smith story. I'll go first. Can I go first?
Okay. Yes, please.
Okay, this is so good. So this story takes place in the 1830s when the saints were told to leave New York and go to Ohio, which was a big ask because they had to leave everything. And I don't know how willing I would have been to do that. I mean, that is frightening. And then you have to go to this place and start your new life, a new home, new everything, and probably had to build your own house. Oh my gosh. So Lucy, of course, and the family, they're like, all right, we're going. And it's still cold when the Saints are leaving New York. So Lucy Mack Smith went in a second group, and there's about 80 people that went with her. And I did not realize that there is, I mean, this is how I don't understand maps at all. Clearly, I had to look it up. But Lake Erie it spans from New York to Ohio. And so I'm reading this story, and she books a passage with 80 people on a canal boat that's going to take them from New York all the way down to Ohio.
Well, they take the canal boat actually
Yes.
on the Erie Canal.
Yes, thank you.
So they get through to Buffalo, to the harbor of Lake Erie.
Thank you for setting that up.
And then they get on a
story is.
steamship.
So before they get on the steamship, they're on this canal boat. And while they're on this canal boat, and mind you, this is like a 300-mile journey. So they're crossing the lake, and there's a broken lock on the canal, which is what allows the boats to, depending on the tide, it lifts the boats up or down. And so the boat is delayed, and the people had not brought enough food for this delay. And I love how the history says hunger and anxiety started to gather in. Well, I would say so. That's the first thing I'm thinking about. We don't have enough food to get us through this. So Lucy Mack Smith says to them, be patient and stop your murmuring. I have no doubt that the hand of the Lord is over us. So the next morning, the workmen, they repair the canal so that they're able to cross. And the Saints, they start moving again. And they arrive at the lake just a few days later. But they're super disappointed because there's this thin ice that's blocking the harbor from preventing them from even going any further. So they look into renting a house, VRBO or Airbnb for this time. I don't know how they do it, but they find this house that they're going to rent, and they only have one room available for 80 people to share. So fortunately, Lucy actually met a steamship captain who knew her brother. And so they made arrangements for them to get onto his boat while they waited for the ice to break. So all of these saints are on the boat, and they're super discouraged, and they're hungry. So I'm just saying, I like how it's written in the book Saints that they're discouraged and hungry. I'm going to go ahead and say they're hangry. Everyone's hangry.
Very much so.
They're wet, they're cold, and they just can't even imagine how this is going to work out for them. And they actually start fighting with each other. I mean, we've got a little bit of not road rage, but boat rage, maybe. And people are watching the Saints fight. And Lucy's starting to get worried about this because she's thinking everyone's going to think that as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we're mean people. This cannot be. So she confronts them. And here's what she says to them. Where is your faith? Where is your confidence in God? If you will, all of you, raise your desires to heaven, that the ice may be broken up and we be set at liberty, as sure as the Lord lives, it will be done. And at that moment, Lucy hears a noise bursting like thunder on the ice in the harbor, and it split wide open, but just enough for the boat to steam through. And there was ice really close on either side of them in that boat. And I just love Lucy's undaunted faith and courage with that promise to all those saints. And then
it's one of my favorite stories. I love it.
Did I steal your favorite story?
No. I just said it's one of my favorite stories.
Okay, good. Yes, I love that.
It's also in At the Pulpit, which is all on your gospel app, and you can read exactly what she said to the saints at that time. So
highly recommend At the Pulpit, written by a brilliant author in our presence, Jenny Reeder. Yeah, and that is free. They made that free on the church website. That's how important and awesome it is. So
and it is on your gospel app.
Gospel Library app.
Gospel Library app. Okay, Cherie, go. What's your favorite story?
Okay, mine is when she is in Missouri. Joseph Smith and Emma are all there also. And this just shows to me just how fearless she is. I just love it so much. So she's in her house. Joseph is there with her, and he's sitting there writing a letter. And she looked outside, and she sees this company of armed men coming towards the city. And she thinks, oh, it must be training day or something. So she didn't think anything about it. And then all of a sudden, they end up coming to their house there, and the officers dismount, and 8 of them walk into the house. And she's thinking, oh, come in, and you're here to see, Joseph and to talk to us and stuff. And she offers them some refreshments and chairs, and they say, no, we will not be sitting down. We have come to kill Joe Smith and all the Mormons. And she said, oh, what has Joseph Smith done that you'd want to kill him? And the officer said, he killed 7 men in Davis County, and we have come to kill him and all his church. And Lucy said, well, he has not been in Davis County. And so this report must be false. And if you actually saw Joseph Smith, you would never want to kill him. And the officer just like, no, there is no doubt. And the report is perfectly correct. And it came straight to us. And I believe it. And we're here to kill the prophet and all of the Mormons. And she said, well, okay, so you're going to kill me too? And he said, yes. She said, okay, go ahead, but act like a gentleman about it and do it quick, because I want to be shot down at once and not be murdered by inches. And he said, oh my gosh, there it is again. You tell a Mormon that you're going to kill him, and they always tell you that that's nothing. If you kill us, we'll be happy.
I love it.
And so then Joseph, who's in there writing this letter with his mother right there, he gets up and finishes his letter. And Lucy says, oh, gentlemen, here is Joseph Smith, the prophet. And they just kind of looked at him like he was a ghost or something. And he smiled and shook their hands and talked to them and told them all about their views and his feelings and the church and the gospel and everything. And then after he's been talking for a while, he says, Mother, I need to go home to Emma. And two of the officers jump to their feet and say, oh, you can't go alone because it's not safe for you. We will escort you home and take you home. And so they take him home. And when that happens, they're talking amongst themselves. And the first officer said, did you feel strangely when Smith took you by the hand? I've never felt that way in my life. And the second officer said, I could not move. I would not harm a hair of that man's head for the whole world. And the third officer said, it's the last time you'll catch me coming to kill Joe Smith or any Mormons. So I just thought, wow, like who stands there and just is so fearless about it and like, go ahead and kill me. Just make sure it's done quickly. But wow. She was awesome that way. I mean,
I love her.
Her foundation was just so strong.
That's a good story.
She's so bold. Like she is not afraid.
No.
Yeah.
And I love it. So my favorite story is she is devastated after her husband dies in 1840. Joseph and Hiram die in 1844. Samuel dies 6 weeks later. And she's just lost. But she is living in the mansion house with Emma. And Wilford Woodruff comes to visit and calls her beloved mother in Israel and the greatest mother in Israel, and tells her that like an impenetrable rock in the midst of the mighty deep, thou hast remained unmoved until God has given thee the desires of thy heart, in seeing the keys of the kingdom of God held in the hands of thy posterity, so planted in the earth that they shall never be taken from it until he reigns, whose right it is to reign. Thou shalt be held in honorable remembrance forever in the congregation of the righteous. So then a year later, she actually becomes the first woman to speak in General Conference.
What?
Yes. In October of 1845, they're holding General Conference outside the Nauvoo Temple. And Brigham Young asks her to come up and speak. And she gives this incredible talk, which is she's been writing her history, which has become a foundational history for everything in the church and our understanding of our restoration. And he calls her also a mother in Israel and says, how about everyone? Do you sustain this woman as the mother in Israel? And they all said amen. And she promised that she would come west with them. She ends up not going west, and she dies in Nauvoo. But before she dies, I love this little story too. Louis Bideman was married to Emma, built her a little wheelchair so that her grandchildren could walk her around the garden.
Oh, how sweet is that?
You know, the other thing is you have to talk about my favorite quote of hers. She's a member of the Nauvoo Relief Society.
Yes.
And it's my favorite quote where she counsels the sisters in Relief Society. And it is just something that we also need at this time. She said, we must cherish one another, watch over one another, comfort one another, and gain instruction. that we may all sit down in heaven together.
Mm-hmm.
My favorite quote of hers, and it's just so important.
It's
I
so
love
interesting
that.
because we see that later in her life. She really believed that. But in the way her daughters just took care of each other and supported each other and helped raise each other's kids, it's really beautiful. And it's really beautiful that we have that heritage for all of us. I love it.
Oh, that's neat. So speaking of her daughters, I love that you just brought that up, Jenny. Let's learn a little bit about them. So we're going to talk about Sophronia, Katharine, and Lucy. Jenny's going to tell us about Sophronia. Then Cherie will tell us about Katharine, and then we'll come back to Jenny to hear that story that you teased a little bit earlier in our episode.
Yes.
Okay.
So Sophronia was born in 1803 in Tunbridge, Vermont, and she had her older brothers, Alvin and Hiram. And then later she had a baby sister, two little sisters, Katharine and Lucy, and then four other younger brothers. But when she was 9, she almost died of typhoid. She was very sick for 3 months, and her parents prayed over her bedside, and she stopped breathing. And Lucy picked her up, a 9-year-old, and carried her around until she gasped and started breathing again. At the age of 13, the family was destitute, and they were warmed out, which means this happened in New England in early America, where if people couldn't take care of their own families, they had to leave because they would become responsibility of the town. And so the constable warmed them out just 2 days after the birth of her little brother, Don Carlos. And she just felt amazing social rejection and anxiety. In fact, as they were leaving and Lucy had to find somewhere for them to go, she sold little bits of cloth and clothing. And the last thing that she sold were the earrings from Sophronia's ears.
Oh.
So she gave up everything. So it was really hard for her. And then they moved to Palmyra, and there's so much persecution surrounding Joseph and the plates. But it fell heaviest on Sophronia. And she said, it says she felt the slight of her friends until her heart was almost broken. She went about her tasks as though in a dream. Sophronia had never been physically strong, and now with the ill treatment of her friends, she grew thin and pale. And it just makes me sad. So let me give you the quick rundown. She married a man named Calvin Stoddard. She was very tall, delicate looking, but her younger sisters were much stronger than she was. She marries Calvin Stoddard, who was an early believer in Mormonism, and that family went to Ohio with the rest of her birth family, and she had a toddler daughter. And then Calvin went on a mission, but he apostatized and left her pregnant with another baby. So she was outside of Kirtland in a town called Chardon. And their 3 sisters were there, Sophronia, Katharine, and Lucy. And Lucy came to help her give birth to her daughter, Maria. So it was a hard, hard time. So then she got sick again with consumption. She just wasn't a strong person. And Lucy, her sweet mother, asked her father, Joseph Sr., and her husband, and Jared Carter and his sons to give her a blessing. And her life was spared.
Wow. Again,
right. So in Ohio, she and her sisters and her mother helped clothe the temple workers in the Kirtland Temple. And she and her sisters knit and carded wool and made the carpets and the curtains. And then her husband died of tuberculosis. She was 34 years old. And it was devastating. She lost all of her money in the Kirtland Safety Society. Then she married William McCleary, another convert who was solidly committed to the church. They go to Missouri. All the hard things happen. And they come back to Illinois. And right before her father died, he gave her a blessing. And he told her, "Thou didst see trouble and sorrow, but thy trouble shall be lessened. For thou hast been faithful in helping thy father and thy mother in the work of the Lord. And thou shalt be blessed, and the blessings of heaven shall rest down upon you, and your last days shall be your best days. Although thou shalt see trouble and sorrow and mourning, thou shalt be comforted, and the Lord will lift you up, and the blessings of the Lord will rest upon you and upon your family. Thou shalt live as long as thou desirest life.
Oh, wow.
Don't you think that you see that though?
Mm-hmm.
She's had two near-death experiences
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
and she lived through them. So she really did have that gift of being able to, have faith to be healed.
And she lost her first husband. And then her second husband, William, they all get endowed in the Nauvoo temple with their daughter, Maria. Their daughter, Maria. Her husband then leaves Nauvoo to go to winter quarters. And then he comes back to Nauvoo. Sophronia is there with her mother and her sisters. And he builds wagons for the people leaving Nauvoo. And then he dies. And we don't know much about his death at all. But she loses that second husband.
Oh, my gosh.
It's so sad. So later on, she and her sisters live in the same town. She raises one of her sister's sons, because she couldn't. And those three sisters lived within blocks of each other. And their grandchildren grew up together. And Sophronia joined the RLDS Church in 1873.
Oh, wow.
She was 70 years old when she joined. And then 3 years later, she passed. But I find it interesting because the church had been established for 12 years before she decided to go ahead and join that church.
That's the RLDS Church, the reorganized church.
Yeah, the reorganized.
Wow.
And her obituary says she was ever ready to bear her testimony to the truth of the work. She always believed that her brother was a prophet, and she believed in the Book of Mormon.
Sophronia, sweet Sophronia. We love her.
Right?
Thank you, Jenny.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Cherie, tell us about Katharine.
Okay, so Katharine Smith Salisbury is her name, and she was born on July 28th, 1813 in New Hampshire. And she was who her mother was pregnant with when her sister Sophronia and Joseph had typhoid fever and all of that story. And then in 1820, when Joseph had the first vision, she was 6 years old. In 1823, when he started being tutored by Moroni and everything, she was 10 years old. So that was the time when you read about the family gathering together, and I call it the original family home evening. Right?
Absolutely.
For sure.
They gathered together and listened to Joseph tell what he'd been tutored about, what Moroni had been teaching them. And I love how Lucy Mack Smith says, I presume our family presented an aspect as singular as any that ever lived on the face of the earth, all seated in a circle, father, mother, sons, and daughters, and giving the most profound attention to a boy 18 years of age who had never read the Bible through in his life, where Joseph would occasionally give us some of the most amusing recitals that could be imagined. He would describe the ancient inhabitants of this continent, their dress, mode of traveling, and the animals upon which they rode, their cities, their buildings with every particular, their mode of warfare, and also their religious worship. He would do this with as much ease, seemingly as if he had spent his whole life among them. So to me, she grew up, she was 10 years old to 14 years old, listening to this night after night, seeing Joseph becoming a prophet. And she was the closest in age to him as one of the sisters. And so she just loved him and really saw who he became as a prophet. And so she could never deny that he wasn't a prophet, and the Book of Mormon was true. And one of the things that happened is in 1827, she was 14 years old. Joseph had the gold plates for the few months, and the family was so invested in these gold plates and making sure it all happened. In fact, they had started praying with diligence and supplication to God to make sure that everything came together, and that as a family that they could do what they needed to do. And Joseph had been running with the plates. They were covered in a cloth or something, and he had been running away from some enemies with the plates. He came into the home and he was kind of bruised and battered. And he gave the plates to Katharine and said, "Here, hide these." And she took them and ran upstairs to their bedroom with Sophronia. And Sophronia threw open the covers and they threw the plates in there. And then they got into bed and pretended they were asleep. And the mobs went all around and they couldn't find them outside the house. So they came inside the house and looked, but they didn't go after them because they looked in the room and thought, "Oh, they're asleep. We don't want to."
Oh, wow.
And save the plates. So
I never knew that story. That's so
Isn't
cool.
it great? I love it.
Yes.
She was physically stronger than her sister. And she also cared for her little sister, Lucy. And she was 6 inches taller than most women.
Oh, I love her even more now.
Later, right? in when she's in Nauvoo and the mobs are all out and stuff, she didn't want to leave the home because she was afraid that people would think she was her husband because she was such a tall woman. So
wow,
I love that. So her first husband is William Jenkins Salisbury. He joined the church and moved to Ohio. He went on a mission, but again, he returned early because of bad behavior. He was an alcoholic. He was expelled from the church. He actually went and enlisted in Zion's camp, and he pawned George A. Smith's gun for whiskey when he was on Zion's camp. So this guy,
a stinker.
He is not a good guy.
Oh,
he was eventually excommunicated and pretty much left the family on their own. Katharine lived in poverty, and she would go with Sophronia and in Kirtland and help make carpet and curtains for the Kirtland temple and the clothing for the men. And she helped form weaving clubs to spin and knit and card wool, all for the Kirtland temple. So she and her sisters were all part of that.
Oh, how neat.
She moved to Missouri and she gave birth crossing the Mississippi River in an abandoned hut, and she named her son Alvin. So there's all kinds of family names coming in and out. It's trying to keep track of all of them. She was so close to Joseph. She would go to Nauvoo and visit him all the time for Christmas and spend Christmas with them. And Joseph took care of her. He'd give her silk dresses and food and clothing and money. They were very close, and she loved him. And when he was killed, he and Hiram were killed in Carthage, she immediately went to Carthage to see him and accompanied their deceased bodies back to Nauvoo. And it was really difficult on her. Out of all the sisters, I think she lived in the most poverty and just with nothing. One of her daughters died of malnourishment and disease and was buried in the river bottoms.
It's so sad. It's so sad.
Her life is sad. Poor Katharine.
So then in 1857, so Jenkins, her first husband, dies of typhoid in 1853. And then she moves to Fountain Green, Illinois to live near Lucy and Sophronia. So I love that the sisters just took care
their whole
of
lives.
each other, their whole lives. They were so loyal to each other. And I really feel like that loyalty came because of what they had to do to make sure the plates in the Book of Mormon came to be and came to fruition. So they just cared for each other. So then she, in 1857, married Joseph Younger, but I think they must not have been married very long. Their marriage only lasted a few months. And she kept the name Salisbury. She never even took his name.
Wow.
She maintained correspondence with her cousin or nephews that went to Utah. So George A. Smith and Samuel H.B. Smith, John Smith, Joseph F. Smith. But she always looked out for them and was grateful for them. In fact, they sent her money because she was so poor.
Oh,
There's an excerpt of one of the letters that she wrote to Joseph F. Smith and her other nephew, John Smith, and said, Joseph and John, for my part, I would be exceedingly glad if all of us, the connection, one and all, could live in a society together and believe in one Lord, one Savior, one faith, and one baptism, and see eye to eye and rejoice in the Holy One of Israel. This is a sincere desire of my heart. Family meant everything. And I love, she has a testimony that at the end of her life, she talked about, and this is found in Witness of Women in the book there. But she said she and the whole family were very invested in the place. And when Joseph brought them home, they assumed the whole family would be allowed to see them. But he said it was forbidden by the Lord. And they were okay with that, after all that. And then she said, many times when I have read the Book of Mormon's sacred pages, I have wept like a child, while the Spirit has borne witness with my spirit to its truth. And she was one of the first 8 members baptized in the church.
Oh, so, that's cool.
One last thing, Illinois Senator Orville F. Berry said of her when she passed away, the world would be wonderfully well off if all women were as good as Katharine Smith Salisbury. Doesn't that remind you of in the Book of Mormon and Captain Moroni? That I love that. That just tells you what an incredible woman she was and how she rose above all of the challenges and the poverty that she had, and just was such a good woman.
She was the sister that lived the longest. She didn't die until 1900.
Wow.
And she always was a little bit worried that her children weren't as religious as she had grown up to be, because she felt that pressure, not the pressure, but she felt the responsibility to ensure their salvation.
Yeah.
And they were just like her poor kids. People made fun of them and bullied them. And it's just sad the way that they were seen as so much less than anybody else.
Wow. Oh, Katherine. Thank you, Cherie, for sharing her story. Yeah. Okay, Jenny, little Lucy.
Little Lucy. This is the youngest child. Like I said before, she was born in 1821, and her mother was 46 and her father was 50. So her brother Alvin was 23, Hiram was 21, Sophronia was 18, Joseph was 15, Samuel was 13, William was 10, Katharine was 7, and Don Carlos was 5. And when her older brother Alvin died, Lucy was 2 years old, and he told her before he died, you must be the best girl in the world and take care of mother. And she did. She took care of her parents. In fact, here's another cute story. She lived in a crowded cabin, was the youngest of 9 kids, but by the time she was 14, she was the only one at home.
Wow.
I know, right?
The spoiled youngest, as always.
I know. When they were leaving Missouri, there was so much mud that she lost her shoes several times in the mud. It just ate her shoes. Once they arrived in Quincy, Illinois, she got cholera and was very sick. But when she heard that her brothers, Joseph and Hiram, had escaped from the Liberty Jail and were coming, she caught her bonnet and started for Hiram's house as hard as she could. She's very sick, right? But the excitement was not sufficient to keep up her strength. And when she got to the door, she fell flat on the ground.
Oh, sweet.
And then later, you can just see her personality and how much she adored her brothers. Later, she heard Joseph coming to visit, and she sprang from her bed and flew down the stairs as though she was altogether well. And she was nursed back to health. So she married a man named Arthur Milliken in Nauvoo in 1840. And when her father died in September of that year, I love this. Their father blessed all of the children before he died. I think he was inspired. Well, not only was he the patriarch and gave them patriarchal blessings, but then later, I think he was really inspired by Lehi in the Book of Mormon. And when he was dying, he gathered all of his children close and gave them blessings. And he says to Lucy, the Lord gave thee unto us to be a comfort and a blessing to us in our old age. Therefore, thou must take good care of thy mother. And she did. She took care of her mother for the rest of her life. And her husband, Arthur, joined the Nauvoo Legion. and he helped Joseph Smith III, his nephew, with a horse, got him a horse so he could ride with the Legion too. And Lucy also joined the Relief Society. And again, this little clip shows how much she loved Joseph and Joseph loved her. She and her husband went on a mission together to her husband's hometown. And she had a baby, her first baby, named Don Carlos, while she was gone. And when they came back, this is May of 1844, so it's just a month before Joseph and Hiram are killed. Joseph meets them at the steamboat, and he wept for joy as he held her baby, Don Carlos.
The one thing about that is they were married just like months when Joseph Smith Sr. dies, and she and her husband cared for her mother from that time on. So she was hardly without her mother and caring for her entire adult life.
Yeah. And then later, she would always host the missionaries coming from Salt Lake City. And Joseph F. Smith wrote about her, Aunt Lucy, though the last one I saw, was the first to receive me in the true spirit of friendship with which I came. They all thought I was prejudiced against them. Now think about them. They've been separated by miles and through Brigham Young. Aunt Lucy said as soon as she got hold of my hand, she felt she had been mistaken, and she greeted me warmly.
Sweet. Oh, my goodness.
And then her nephew, Solomon Salisbury, preached her funeral sermon when she died. Her husband died. Her husband, actually, they became prosperous, and they lived in comfort. And he died of pneumonia in 1882. He was 64 years old, and she died just a few months later.
Wow. That's young. Wow, little Lucy.
Little Lucy.
Oh, Jenny, thank you for telling us about that sister. Okay, we just learned about then Lucy, Sophronia, Katharine, and Lucy, these three incredible women who helped build the foundation of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And I love the stories you've shared. So here's my question then. Now that you know, and you've both paid the price to know these stories, I mean, my goodness. I mean, let's not, while Jenny is the author, Cherie was also a helper for Jenny.
Absolutely.
All the information to publish the books that were published. So Cherie is a great researcher.
Couldn't have done it without Cherie.
It's true. All right, you two. So here's what I want to know. Thinking about all these women, and we've talked about why it's important to know these women, what's your overall takeaway about these women?
Well, my thought is that they were incredibly loyal to each other and never denied that Joseph was a prophet and that the Book of Mormon was true. And so they were a witness of his prophecies, the prophet, and of the Book of Mormon at all times. They never denied that. And so that's important to know because we don't hear about women that are witnesses like that. And they firsthand saw all of that and they never denied that. The other thing is God is so good. We sometimes feel like we don't live up to the blessings or the assignments or responsibilities we have because we're so hard on ourselves. But their blessings, their patriarchal blessings that they were given by Joseph Smith Sr., all talked about at the end of their lives, how they were going to live happy and no more in poverty in some of their joyful, most wonderful times of their life. And if you think about that, a lot of people would think, oh, well, that was the time when they weren't being faithful anymore. But God accepted their offering and it didn't matter, what was happening. Their hearts were in the right place always, and they continued always to be that witness. So I love that about them. That's what I learned.
I love that too. What a great thing to remember that God accepts our offering because he knows where we are. He knows the situations we're in. He knows our life circumstances, and he's the only one that can accept that. Wow. Sometimes
we're just so hard on ourselves, right? We expect way too much more than is needed. So that's one thing I learned from them.
Love it. Wow. Thank you, Cherie. What about you, Jenny?
I think I'm the same as Cherie. They always were strong and firm in their testimony of Joseph Smith as a prophet and the Book of Mormon. And in a way, they're like Emma. They didn't come west, but they believed, and they stood by that belief till the end of their days, and they took care of each other. I love what Cherie shared about Lucy's words in the Nauvoo Relief Society minutes about how we need to watch over and care for each other until we all sit down in heaven together. And I see that happen with these ladies at the end of their lives. And I can just imagine them all sitting together with their brothers and with their sisters-in-law. And I just think they are so happy to be together.
Okay, I have a question then, because you said they didn't go west. And I wonder if anyone else is thinking this question, because oftentimes we equate going west with being true to the gospel of Jesus Christ. How do you reconcile the fact that Lucy and Emma stayed behind, but that they are still very fervent and strong in the gospel?
I think there's a couple of reasons. I keep going back to section 25 when the Lord tells Emma to go with Joseph at the time of his going. And she does that. She goes with him to New York, to Ohio, to Missouri, to Illinois. And then when he was killed, I think if we flip those words just a little bit, she stayed with him at the time of his staying. She protected his body. She protected the Book of Mormon manuscript and the Bible translation. And she took care of her mother-in-law and of her children. And they did, I believe, receive a crown in heaven, as it says in section 25. And I think just because she doesn't look like her sister-in-law, Mary Fielding Smith, who came across to Utah, she doesn't look like that, but she is loyal and true and committed and knows.
Yeah, and all those women were. That's, you know, and they had circumstances of poverty and their aged mother that they're going to take care of. They're not going to leave.
No way.
And they're all going to just stay together and take care of one another. So absolutely. It would be something if they denied that Joseph was a prophet and that the Book of Mormon wasn't true, but they never, ever did that.
No.
So.
Wow. Brilliant. Thank you for answering that, both of you. That was so fun. What a great discussion about these women. So if you want to read more about Lucy and her daughters, we highly recommend these books. So the first, again, is From the Pulpit, and that is on your Gospel Library app. The second is Witness of Women. Then another one I'm going to also plug is The First 50 Years, which is so awesome. It's the history of the Relief Society. Any other books you want to recommend?
There's a really great book that Kyle Walker edited. It's called United by Faith, and there's a chapter about each of the Smith family. And they're incredible chapters. And so that's where I found a lot of the information about them. But he also wrote a book just about Katharine, the sister of the prophet. And it's just beautiful to read and see how these things played out.
Okay, so go check those books out, read them, and just dive in this year as we study these unnamed women of church history, because their stories are important and their voices really made a difference. So thanks, ladies.
Thank you.
It was awesome. Thank you.
That was so fun. Oh my gosh, thank you for your wisdom and willingness to discuss these women of the Doctrine and Covenants. That was so fun. And thank you to those of you who are listening. Thanks for joining us for this second episode of Unnamed Women of the Doctrine and Covenants. And for the record, there's 7 more to come. You're going to love it. Unnamed Women of the Doctrine and Covenants is a special bonus series from the Sunday on Monday podcast, and you can find it wherever you get podcasts, on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and more on the LDS Living podcast feed. So go follow us for many more women this year. The Sunday on Monday study group is a Deseret Bookshelf Plus original brought to you by LDS Living. It's written and hosted by me, Tammy Uzelak Hall, and today our awesome study group participants were Jenny Reeder and Cherie Clark. Our podcast is produced by Koa Singer and me. It is edited and mixed by Koa Singer, and our executive producer is Aaron Hallstrom. Thanks for being here. We'll see you next week. And please remember, you are God's favorite.
No, because I had to do some math in my head to figure it out, and I don't do public math.
We don't do public math.
Okay.